Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me and my guest this morning on Friday Focus. This is the 17th of April. The year is flying away again. We are coming up to our 50th episode in a few episodes' time, and we are planning something special. But thank you for joining us today. It's great to be here. Now, my guest this morning, Sibani Bose, is founder of Disha, and we're going to be talking about this whole subject of data in schools. Now, you know, we've talked about many things over the last few months, and we're covering quite a lot of subjects. But the one thing that everyone is asking questions about and talking about is this whole thing about making decisions and data. And I thought it would be really appropriate to have Sibani here to talk about this thing that she spends her life dealing with. So, Sibani, thank you for joining me this morning. Nice to have you. Tell us a bit about your journey and how Disha has come to be.
So first of all, Chris, thanks for having me here. I am delighted to be having this conversation, such an apt conversation in this moment, and has been throughout. So a little bit about myself. I come from a very strategic data consulting background where I have delivered huge data transformation, data use cases for the bigger enterprises, where data is thought very strategically. How do we position the various data assets we have in such a way that it propels our vision and mission, right? And you would know that as we ever increasingly use technology, the data we generate and the data we collect just grows and grows, right? Not all data is meaningful, right? Not all data is relevant. So that's how you decide on positioning data strategically. And over since the last 8-9 years, I thought, right, we focused very much on sectors that have a societal impact but quite nascent in their data maturity journey, right? They are, and those sectors are housing associations, education, and not-for-profit. But our primary work has been on education. What I found was, I have to use the words quite quite carefully. 9 years ago, I found they were almost 20 years back. And it was
compared with 20 years back. Compared with who?
Financial services, telecoms. Yeah, they were using data. Some of the use cases, you would be flabbergasted how they were using, how they were interacting with the customers, right? So I felt, right, it's unfair. Just like how in society we don't want that divide, that huge divide between, you know, the distribution of wealth, the distribution of education, educational equity, everything else we want collectively as a society to go up. I felt it's unfair how education was using data. And in fact, just the definition of data was so far apart. Data goes back to just being thought of as numbers, even in January 2026. So for Q4 of 21, I took this mission on myself and the vision that data shouldn't just be the privilege of bigger organization, right? And I thought, what can I do easier? Because I felt the pain of how data was collected. There is somebody, it's not as if they're not doing some sort of analysis. There is somebody who is taking the pain of bringing the information from your safeguarding, from your HR, from your external assessment, from a pupil voice, and then producing something, right? By the time you get to that, the crisis had already gone. It was probably dealt with in a different way. So how can we go from a reactive data management to a much more proactive data management? And that gave birth to Disha. Disha is an AI-powered analytics platform that streamlines all your disparate data and brings them forefront to who is the student today that I need to talk to, and when I say I need to talk to, what should be my important message? If I have to spend just 2 minutes or just 5 minutes with that student, what should my message be, right? And that needs a holistic view of the student that is not just present in your MIS. It's not just the attendance, right? It is present in the pupil's voice. It is present in how the pupil is feeling today. It is present in the history of safeguarding information that the student, that the school has. So that's where Disha was born. And that's what I'm trying to bring. So a couple of things I'm trying to get as a result of that: elevating the sector's understanding of what does data mean, right? Sorry, I will carry on talking about.
I was going to. I suppose the question to ask there is, what do we know? That's the, so you've alluded to it there in what you've said, that data is more than just numbers, and quite a lot of data analysis in school is purely external results and sort of journeys and flight paths, as we all those kind of things. But what you're saying is really it's building a big rich picture that's focused on the children, maybe even the staff, around how do we react, what's the human part of our responsibility. So tell us a bit how that's kind of shaped.
Exactly. So if you think the teachers are doing they work hard, they constantly, you want the teachers to be in front of the students, absolutely nailing the message that uplifts the student as a whole, right? So all the AI technology is helping is to make sure that the operational tasks are faster, right? For example, marking essays, brilliant. But what about you had an internal exam today, and you were standing outside. The parent dropped the child and actually said something happened at home for which the child isn't what the child should be normally. How does that come into that marking? So, and that child sat down and gave the exam. Clearly, the child did not get as much as they should have. How does the day the child was, and that the child was not feeling up to it, for it could be n number of reasons. How do you bring that picture in? So when I speak about holistically looking at a children's information, right, we would want to understand things like, are we doing the right thing? Are we celebrating the students that needs to be celebrated, as well as are we focusing on the right area of intervention that we need? How many times have you thought, well, we are really doing everything we can, why is this still not working, right? And that's where the power of joined up data comes in. That's where I talk about bring the technological advancement that has happened to the power to showcase you not just a gut feeling, not just the human biases we have about, oh, so and so is not good at something. So many times, in my life as a child, I have heard that so many times, right? Has anybody really sat down and said, oh, you actually said you have a sleep problem, is that okay, right?
Yeah.
Has anybody asked me that question? No.
Yeah.
So this is what I say when I say to look at the whole picture, instead of thinking that, oh, no, she's not really good in maths, or, oh, she's not really good in that. It may very well be, not everybody is good in everything. But how do you break that view of stamping somebody with not good at that? And you can only do that not having a siloed view of a student's information. Yeah. You can only do that when you bring a teacher's view, a parent's view, a student's itself. Nobody knows better than, if you go towards the secondary side, you will start to get, we need to take, I was on this curriculum conference, and you were as well, Chris, Sir Gauss said about...
Gergraus, yes.
Yes, Gergraus. The day we think we are going to take the kids seriously, we will be really serious about using technology and AI for the right use,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I think there is such a weight to that sentence, not very hypothetically at the top, actually making sure you put those things in place.
That's so true, Sabani. I do a lot of work with schools. In fact, I'm off on Monday to a school in the north looking at enterprise. And I asked the leaders the question, if the children were actually really innovative and they came up with something that could change your environment, would you take it on? Would you actually do it? Because how do you think those children would feel if they've been innovative and they can see problem solving and they've got a solution, and then you ignore it? How does that make them feel? And that in what you're saying is using that information to make real change actually means being serious about that data. It's not that we've got it all sorted. It's the fact that that these things can impact the journey. They can really influence. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it can impact the journey. You will be surprised as to the impact it will make and quickly it will make, right? So and also, when you trust, if in normal scenario, when you trust somebody, trust is a two-way street, right? When you listen and you trust, you give that level of accountability to the children itself. They need to take, oh wow, okay, I am trusted with doing this, so I should actually keep up with that trust. So the journey becomes slightly easier in getting and uplifting, right?
Yeah.
And it is true about making making that connection. It is true about and not just somebody who can do this, right? It should be ingrained in the culture of the school groups, where this is what they expect, right? This is what they expect to see. The constant I look at data such in because of my strategic background in data. The things that I find sometimes quite challenging is, you talk about data and the first thing that comes in is dashboard or some technology, right?
Yeah.
And I hammer on that data is not a technology function. To be honest, this particular sentence, even the enterprises haven't really got the grips of.
Right.
They have gone to the point of creating a CDO, Chief Data Officer, but that does not translate to, in the working practices, that data is not a technological function. So, EI Square is the consultancy that we deliver work on, like data maturity, strategically looking at data. And when we are doing a particular piece of project, we hammer on this, that the success of your data vertical would be when we will go and talk to all the business partners you have. Because well, fine, I could say that, yeah, integration, let's bring it back to education. Fine, I can, you can go and create a central place, ingest all the data. My question next is, so what? Fine, yeah, you got all your information about the students' pupil voice, you got that data stored, so what?
What does it tell you? What do you know?
What does it tell you? Does it tell you the student every morning, a head of year or a head of the class literally has very little time to, okay, who am I going to be speaking today, right? Or not, or what is the message that I should be giving today? Who should I be celebrating in the assembly? Who should I be celebrating today? Or, what message should I give that uplifts the day, right? So that so what is very, very important, and it's a challenge. I will absolutely admit it's a challenge that I was first faced with when Disha was launched, when we were tucked in talk, and I was like, okay, no. So I asked this question to a school leader: what does data tell you to do, right? Every morning, and the answer I got was, we have a Power BI dashboard. And I No, that wasn't the answer I was asking for.
Yeah,
So, somebody actually asked me, Savani, what would be the answer you would look for when you say, "What is data telling you?" So let me give you a few examples of.
Do. I was going to ask you that question, so that's carry on.
Yes, sorry, Chris, please interrupt me and ask away the questions.
So what would it look like if you went in and thought, wow, this is brilliant? What would that look like?
So what it would look like is, I will talk from a decisions perspective. What does the school need to change when data is presented in a way that gives them the whole picture? Yeah. And I'll use an example of a school where they have seen this through our platform and what they have changed. They saw that a gifted and talented student, where on a particular day was being sporadically absent more than other days. Yeah. And, this child was very good in studies, academically quite good. It's considered so if you think about normal scenario of thinking, you would not think a child who really likes to study, who does get more than, is absent regularly on a particular, that would never come to your mind. You would always think the bias would, oh, there is something going on, something maybe health wise, whatever. What that translated to when they saw the data presented joined up was, on those days there was a particular sport that the child was playing, or was, with gifted and talented, you try to push the child along several ways. And actually, the child wasn't interested as such, right? So would find ways to avoid going into that. That then translated in conversations about understanding why that sport, whether it is a team or the sport in itself, was an issue. And that then translated, there is certain incident that made the child not be part of. So imagine if you are presented with that information, you are now not, oh, why are you absent? You should be, encouraging. The message would have been more about encouraging the child to come, be regular, see your attendance is that, you must talk about, but understanding that it is actually those days that the child was slightly absent. This is a gifted and talented child. Those days where the sports, and if when you saw the data, what was also presented was, he was present on the days that the sports didn't happen, right? Where he already knew the sports didn't happen. So that's what I mean by, when you have that, you are driving a different message. You're going to the core of the problem, which is not biased in your view of why that is happening. And I always say that to the school leaders, that, look, you know the child best. The teachers are spending every day physically with the child. They would know the child best. What data is doing you is fueling with that, as in bringing all the other contextual information of the child, so that you get the best out of your interaction with the child.
So really what you're saying is that that you're using data to recognize patterns of behavior and looking for patterns of activity, both positive and negative. I mean, obviously that's a negative one, in the sense of, you're identifying where something's not happening as you would expect it to, and it's not just that, well, okay, it doesn't matter because this child's going to achieve. It actually does matter in terms of the bigger picture, that they're engaged and learning. Why aren't they involved in that? So what about on the positive side? Where is it seen? Where have you seen it used to kind of push learners on in ways that you didn't expect?
Couple of places was where, I will say more about, not about progressing them on the academic side, but positive side, where improvement. I spoke about people voice. I spoke about seeing the whole picture together. So when a child recognizes that actually digital device and my use of digital device is causing me stress or causing me less sleep, they recognize it, but they can't take the action not to do anything with it because the peer pressures are so high, right? Even though this may sound negative, but the outcome is very positive, right? Why I'm saying this is positive, because it starts from a point where the child recognized already. Yeah. So this is why it is positive. Now, yeah, the child recognized already, the child has put up a pupil voice, then what? Right? So that's where the positive, the journey for the school, the teacher, the parent, everybody involved in to make that happen becomes so much easier, right? I understand. So it starts with the child writing a comment. I understand this is taking too much. I don't feel well after using this platform. I can't sleep. So you have all this information. This is a golden case of, let's take that child through the journey of supporting. Let's reiterate the message that, what you see socially isn't all true. Let us, because if everybody around you is talking about, how good social platform is, oh, look at my views or this, you get to the belief that, oh yeah, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Oh, I should be in it, right? So, but when the child has actually recognized that, even though I would love to be part of this in some way, be connected to my friends, if you go deep down and ask them, they actually want to be with their friends, right? But they also recognize that there is something that is causing the stress. That's a positive. That's a starting point of a positive. So we started, the example I gave with the gifted and talented, the starting point wasn't positive, right? This is a starting point which is positive, right? And then there is a complete positive. So data tells you things that you need to celebrate. I told you on an assembly where you suddenly you are constantly praising people getting the biggest points or praising this, but sometimes you need to go to that level of slight change. Oh, so and so helped with something. Do you ever, like, if you think of assembly, what are the messages? Do you ever talk about, somebody who went out of their way to help somebody, right? And celebrate that. So those are the things I would say, it just brings a very different vibe to the school.
Yeah, and I guess I hear, I remember it in my own sort of leadership time. We were doing some of these things 20 years ago, that but not in the sophisticated way that you're describing. I guess what I'm hearing is, what do I know, or what do I need to know, and how am I going to know those things? So, I remember a child who was actually the official carer for their parent. And so their school life was secondary to being the supportive child, in the home, and actually, disabled parent that needed all the things that involves, and actually celebrating that exactly as you've just said. How would anybody know that
exactly
if that wasn't known? So I get, what you're leading us to is, what do we know? What do we really know? And then what do we need to know? And how would we collect that information? Now, some of that isn't data in the sense, is it? It's a human interaction that would maybe be kept in notes or stored somewhere so that it can be analyzed in the way that you're describing.
It's fascinating. You said some of that is not data. So
well, that's I was deliberate, but yes.
Okay.
Deliberate.
Right. Okay. Last week, a fascinating conversation, just on a LinkedIn platform. I saw this note about someone posting a fabulous picture of a conversation with a child on their marks, and how rich that conversation and that conversation was, and how insightful that was. But said, well, this is not data, so and I immediately jumped and said, that's a very rich data, right? We have to get away from the fact of, and I guess I historically, how data is used is probably, this is why it is embedded, right? Data has always been used to see how well they are doing in grades. You survey people, you do 0, 1 to 10, how you are, and you never thought about, this is where the big data comes in, right? You never thought voice, interaction, speaking, images. These are all rich information. And now it's 20. I mean, that's why I say that 15, 20 years ago, people were still, you yourself, Chris, you said you were still analyzing it. Yes, the technology has massively advanced, and the enterprises were absolutely using it sophisticatedly 10, 15 years back, but it is there. Nothing is stopping the schools to have that joined up view, have that data, that interaction. So I said, that goes back. I said, I absolutely agree with the sentiment of what you say, just not the definition of data. That is very rich data, and the technology is there. You talk, you record, the dictate, transcribes, goes in, and you can easily then have a picture of and know exactly what the child would love to do, what motivates them, right? So you can't, if somebody really doesn't like something, doesn't motivate, you can't do anything about it, right? So things like, when you see a particular behavioral issue raised by a particular teacher constantly, then you got to ask it, is it the child who has this behavioral issue, or is it a relationship? Does the child need to go to another form, or does the class needs to change? What is it? And that's, again, having that, not a siloed view of suspensions and exclusions, right? How many? So that's what I mean, that a definition of data is anything and everything relevant. Hugely important is the relevancy.
And I guess that the thing for most system-wide change is the consistency of that data and how that's applied. Because what you're really saying is, because I know a lot of teachers will say, yeah, but I know that. But you only know that within the silo of your experience.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking of, when I was sort of there and doing that, it was a school of 2,500 children. We had 126 teachers, and what was going on in each of those 126 teachers' heads every morning was impossible to know, because they had all of their things going on in their lives. So what you're saying is that consistency in a systematic view is quite different, and it's different in a small school with 400 children and 30 staff. That's a very different feel, but it's the same application, isn't it?
It is absolutely the same application, but I will actually say that the feel may be different. So let's bring it back to a very small school. I mean, and then you can understand when you scale that to much bigger, right? Let's bring it to a 200 students school, 200 kids school. The teachers of the classroom know the child best, always. Yeah. What happens when the teacher is absent? What happens when you have a cover child, when you have a cover teacher who doesn't really understood what happened yesterday, right? And this is where I'm saying that, yes, for a 200 student pupil school, the transformation or the information translation timing might be less, but you are still very reactive. You don't know automatically, if the teacher suddenly went away to another school, the wealth of information that the teacher carried in her or his head for every single child they have dealt with, that's gone. Yeah. How do you store that very rich information? You start from that. Where do we, on practice? So this isn't just getting a technology. Not at all. This is a cultural shift. This is a cultural shift of everybody working towards that, working towards having accessibility to a joined up information that gives them. And then question. If you don't see it, question. Can I have a look at that? Can I see that? Can I do that? Because that which, when it empowers you to be more data driven and work in a data driven fashion.
And that's a fascinating shift, isn't it? Because
Mm-hmm.
teaching and education has been seen entirely as a human activity.
Yeah.
And when technology comes along, people get quite disturbed by the kind of threat of the humanity moving out. But actually, what you're saying is, if we could capture the humanity, if we could
Mm-hmm.
capture that, all of those interactions and that, the data points that you're talking about, and that might be a corridor conversation or a knowledge about a particular pattern of life, that can inform the process so much. I'm kind of still resonating what you said about exclusions and suspensions, and that so many of those children that go through that process, it's inconsistency that sparks the initial instigation. It's that teacher said that, and if my regular teacher had been there, they would know not to have said that, and all of those things, as you said, so the member of staff that's got that particular issue about that particular kind of behavior, and all of those things instigate that kind of interruption and that inability to keep consistent activity. And knowing what you're saying, having that data in a place where it can be used would be so powerful.
Absolutely. And it's a mindset shift, because if you think about any school, when they just look at behavior, right? What are they thinking? What are they thinking when they are looking at that behavior? Is it, oh, we need to improve the behavior of the child? Do they ever think about that, what is causing, or is there a relationship thing that is causing them? So that's why I always go back to the question of, so what, right? Please go and look. If you want to do one thing from this conversation today in your school, go back and think about questioning whatever way you see your information to say, so what? What's the bigger picture here?
And that question is the really powerful one. Okay, so
Yes.
I've put my effort into this. So what? And I just want to bring in a comment from someone who's watching. Rab Bassi, thank you for your input, and I really appreciate you being here. It's great to have you here. So just Subhani, just your feeling. What.
I'm just reading.
Yeah. How do we move them into a frame of mind where they feel great, but the data proves the attainment? What's your response?
As Chris says, we still feel in the space of teacher feel they know their pupils. It's very important, the quote around feel. And this is where I speak about information all together, right? And he's absolutely, thank you so much, Rab. He absolutely said about, I am a believer in thinking with the mind and saying it with the heart. How do you, when I break that thinking with the mind needs to be fed with the relevant information so that the heart can action that, right? And when you present, irrespective of the audience, when you present what the information is saying, right? For example, I think he asked about the teacher thinks one way, but the attainment proves different, right? When you present that information, not just for that particular teacher and the pupil, right? Oh, he doesn't know. But if you present it holistically, the whole thing, then you are making the teacher question their own judgment about the student. And this is where I say about bias, having a biased, narrow, siloed, channeled view of the student. Everybody knows their student, yes, but in the context of your relation with the student, not in the bigger picture context. And it's not for the lack of they don't want to, it's for the lack of it's too much. They already have so much. So that's what I would say, that you need to be, if you present the information, there is a question of, let's discuss, right? Why do we see and feel the student is this versus not?
Yeah, I'm going to go, Rab, thank you for your interaction here. You've gone in, he's asked another question here. how many schools provide access to vital progress data for kids and their parents? Should this not be the norm throughout the year, and not just at parents' evening? I think he's right, and this is a thing we've wrestled with for years. But I think there are things that we need to deal with in the system. This is not just about as Subhani is saying, it's not just the technology. This is about the consistency. This is about the, what the Ofsted used to call in-school variance, where one person's calling a 5 a 5 and it's another person that calls the 5 is something completely different. And that variation and being consistent and seeing it, and then just the humanity of people saying stuff when they're angry. So many times I've had to deal with members of staff who've written what they felt in that moment, but it's actually not for the parents' consumption, and you do need to be able to gatekeep it. Subhani, go on. You.
Yeah, so I will unpick. There is a lot in there, isn't it, Chris?
There is.
So,
absolutely,
there's a lot. So I will unpick all of them. One aspect of when when you are in front, when things are getting recorded, you become very conscious, don't you? So you said that, okay, you are writing notes when you were angry, and should you be doing it, right? Because you need to take your personal emotion out of the judgment of the child, right?
Yep.
Or whatever that incident was. Now, imagine having this. It's not just a siloed one-on-one relation with this child, with this parent, and with this yourself. And this is where I bring the whole concept of the whole school having that access to knowing that child. That teacher moves on knowing that child. So there is cultural shift when you start to position data more strategically, when you start to position that information is available for the betterment of making decision. Everybody then starts to build culturally of making sure that information which powers and drives a student is out of any personal judgment. So this is why I say it's a cultural shift. When you start to bring data centrally, it's a cultural shift. So I would stress on that point that this is a journey you need to undertake on, knowing very well. So when we onboard schools onto the platform, I hammer on this message that it will change how you interact with the data. For example, I think Rab asked about some vital access of data and their parents.
Well, that parents have got constant access to progress data.
Yes.
Why isn't this a norm?
It should be. It should be a norm, right? They should know it. I mean, it should be a norm but the reason, I think this is where it goes back to what you mentioned, right? That on a day-to-day basis, parent can't see what is going on within the school, because we need to culturally set aside certain emotions of certain teachers or and emotions of, not, when I say certain teachers, it feels as if they are personally like that. Not that at all. But how do we make sure the information we input is at a time when you don't have to bring on everything that is going on? So that's a cultural shift and a change, you would say, right? That you hammer that message to make sure, by the way, parents are, we have made parents access, they can see what they want to see, they can interact. But I also have a feeling, and I also feel that you ought to make these practices depending on your audience, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to you are busy people, you don't want to open the gates where you get so many queries which aren't for the betterment of the student, as in you want to be helping the student. So it's a very hard balance to have, but it is a balance which you ought to know and practice. You do not open up when your functional practices and your audiences are different, and not everything is, you can't have a similar practice everywhere. because as humans, we are not the same. So you ought to understand that.
Yeah, and that's where we need to get more sophisticated about what's being presented. I mean, we know that in social media terms that different audiences receive different things, and that's only, we're all working on that in business. But the reality is, in schools, different children, different families, different values. The school might have a kind of an agreed position on that, and then you develop into a kind of communication protocol. But Rab, thank you for your input is important. It's a question, should parents see that formative assessment as things are going on? What does it mean to them as much as it does to the child? We can do that in a child's book, and you should be seeing that information daily, weekly. But that information is growing over time. It opens up all sorts of questions, doesn't it, Sabini?
Yes, it does. But I would actually scale that. Parents just shouldn't see the attainment and the assessment, that is going on.
Yes.
I would scale it to the pupils' emotion and the views that are going on, right? Because what you don't want to do, if one day as you open up, it has to be contextual. You don't want to have a siloed view. We have a siloed view in the schools for teachers. We don't want to have a siloed view for the parents, right? And the students spend a lot of time at school, right? The parents need to know, apart from studying, what is going on, how are they mentally, physically, how are they coping, not just attainment and grades, right? So I would say not just the attainment, I would say open up to how they are doing naturally. The friends, the little things they have done well, right? And the little things they might need help. So, and it takes a really good thought process to think what's relevant. What is relevant for the audience? Very important.
And that, Rab, thank you. You've kind of opened up a conversation, and it's kind of we got lost in the detail. He says, "Do you feel that there's data available? The priority for school management is to tick Ofsted boxes and not drive possible progress." Well, I think Rab, you're right. It's very easy to get very focused and siloed on that particular mentality. But the reality is that, yes, Sabani, that's what you're saying. There is a massive data in the broadest, that's probably data is the wrong word. There is a massive information. There's a massive things that we know. It's the question of how we bring those things together and what's the story that they tell us in the main. If you're only focused on that measurement tool, then you are going to have a very fixed mindset view. The rich and broader view is to bring in all of this other information that we know, what's going on at home, what's going on for the child, what's going on in their motivation, what's happening in their rich education experience. What do they want about their aspirations? What do they're looking for? And it's not just what am I going to do when I leave school. That's all of the things that life is going to bring for them. Sabani, it's a rich picture, isn't it?
It is. And I would say, Chris, if you don't know something, you don't know something, right? And I would actually say, because I want the definition of data to be really understood as information. Let's just put it information. Yeah.
Yep.
That data, the reason that we have gone down this hole of siloed focus, because they didn't just know that there is huge capability, and it is so laborious. It is so laborious to get a whole picture of a child from various. That's why it's easier to focus on something that we can easily get, because rightfully so, you should be with the students. It shouldn't be collecting, changing, analyzing. That shouldn't be what you should be doing, right? Yeah. So it is not for the lack of that they don't want to, or they don't understand that seeing the whole student is what is relevant. Information should be present. It is just the practice has been so laborious that let's just make sure when an Ofsted inspector comes, we have it. If you think how much time you spend before an Ofsted inspector comes to get all your information together, or randomly asking for a student and show how have you dealt with their well-being, all of if you think about that, the amount of time you spend to do that, it takes away valuable time from being with the students, right? Or doing something. And this is why it's the core practice of, number one, understanding that information. I always say schools are data rich and insights poor, right? You have so much information on a regular basis about that child. Understanding all of that data could be enriched for the betterment of the child, could be enriched for really efficient decision making, and presenting or talking about data and giving access to that data should not be an afterthought, should not be an after, oh, this is a, right now, data in schools is just a byproduct of using technology. It is not thought through strategically at all.
And that gets us to that. I mean, I know I've said this little sort of things many times, but it's that value what you measure what you value. Now, whichever way round you put that, measure what you value. Now, the reality is we've tended to measure the things that are easy to measure and represent that in the easiest way that we can, a numeric scale or an alphanumeric scale, however we and that's easy because you can process the data, as in you can process the numbers easily. You can take a set of numbers and create an average and think that tells you something. So what you're saying is there's a richness of data that isn't just limited by ease of forming an analysis, a process. So measure what we value. What do we value? That's 100%. The question to answer.
100%. I was talking to a leader in a trust of, I think, 12 or 13 schools, and they only do staff survey once a year, which has open-ended question. So, right, really, once a year? I mean, your emotions change every day. Why once a year? So it takes 3 weeks for one person to analyze that whole richness of information to understand everything. And by the end of that 3 week, that person has just lost interest in actually actioning of everything else. And this is 2026. You have sentiments coming out of your whole unstructured comments, feedback, complaints that somebody's calling, a parent is calling and complaining. You could actually record the sentiment to say whether that person who is calling to say, put the complaint, were they in a hyper state of something that was going on, right? So you deal with that in a different way. All of this exists. You deal with, and that is what I'm saying. There's so much information, so much things that could be done, so much information that is done, and we ought to look beyond what can easily be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, Subhani, I'm going to get told off because we've been talking so much that I haven't done the kind of the bits in the middle. So I'm just I'll just do that one thing now. Sure. If I may, just 1 second. So, look, great conversation, and we got deep into it. And thank you for those that are on LinkedIn or on YouTube or Spotify or Substack. You will be involved in this conversation. As we say, please get involved in the conversation. If you're watching this after the live, then please leave a comment. We will respond to you. One of the team will get to you, or I'll get to you to respond to your comment. Please do get involved in the conversation, and obviously you can reach out to Subhani through direct messaging here, or if you look at the post on LinkedIn, you can see direct connections to Disha AI. We're not here to advertise and promote products particularly, but I am interested in conversations with people that are doing interesting stuff. And Subhani is definitely doing some interesting stuff, and this has raised a really interesting question. So if you're here and you're enjoying this, please like, share, and subscribe on whatever channel that you're using. And I need to do the other part of just advertising what's going on at the moment. You remember that I've been talking about the Efficient School. Now, I think quite relevant to the conversation we have today, data and telling and informing us of what's going on and breaking the way things have been. An ebook is out on the Efficient School. We've just published the perfect timetable as well. If you go to the website, you can see links to where to get hold of them, or you can see here a QR code that will get you to the Amazon page. We are republishing the Efficient School in August. It will be out August the 13th in paperback and audiobook form. So please do get involved in that and go out and get your copy. You can see the QR code there. Please do enjoy it. Subhani, we don't have much time left, and I just wanted to get to that sort of last. You talked about your journey. You've talked about what you're facing. We've challenged this idea of what data is, and it's all that we know. If there was one thing that you could influence in the education system, and I shape it as, if you could change one thing, what would it be? What would you be looking to kind of influence in the bigger picture?
So let me say let me bring back what used to be to what it is now. And that's if you will understand where I'm going with my one thing, because I founded Disha with a vision, right, on the education sector. If you go into a school now, you would not expect to write in a register an attendance. You would expect a digital platform to capture that. You would expect, an MIS to be present, right? You wouldn't expect a drawer full of papers and notes about this. You don't expect that at all, right? So we absolutely have moved. My vision for schools is this information, volumes of rich information that is present, they should be able to easily access that. That is the one thing I would hope, that the vision why I started Disha, that I am able to put that. Oh yeah, of course, yeah, we have, right? So that would be my one thing. Along the journey, there are a multitude of things that will come as a result. For example, we were talking about it, is the definition of data. People's understanding, people's maturity, people's dealing, people culturally shifting towards positioning data strategically will all change. But one thing, if that is the case, is they should not have a hesitation of accessing information, any information. So that would be my one thing.
And that's get serious about information and start talking about it and start questioning. What do we know? Why do we know it? How do we know it? What do we need to know? How would we collect that? That's the sort of richness of this conversation. Now, Subhani, I need to put this one on. Rob must be someone you know. There's a post to go and have a look. Go and find Rob Wall's post in a moment. I can't
thank you, Rob. Yes.
And congratulations. Look, it's as ever, this process of having these conversations is so rich, and it's a pleasure to talk it through. You talk so well about what's going on in the business world, enterprise world, to what's going on in schools. As I'm listening to you, I think of things. When I was going through the academy process back in 2009, 2010, I remember being, because you talked about the attendance. When we went through the academization process, we had the DFE advisor who came and sat in a room and was signing off various things, and he asked for the attendance book, and we didn't know what that was. I'd never, because we'd been taking registers on Bromcom, Sims, whatever, for years and years. The little book, you're pressing your pad and so on. Are we kind of, what's the attendance book that you want to see? He said, well, the attendance book, the ledger.
Oh my.
2010. I know this is 16 years ago. We need to see the attendance list. So, well, I can print that off for you. I just press the button and I'll get you the list. 2,500 children. We can get you the list. No, I want the handwritten book. You think, what world are you in? because
Yes.
this,
Yes.
and this was, and really it speaks to what you're saying in that whole process, that schools and data and maturity has moved on, and we need to talk about it, don't we?
Yes. So think about exactly the same thing, Chris. But think about when I see people talk in school on data being numbers, I just say, what world are you on? Like, do you know? I mean, there
Yeah,
is so much rich information present,
yeah,
and we will get there. And this is my hope. If a lot of us keeps talking about the very fundamental fact of the definition of data, we will collectively enrich and get that data literacy going towards the right direction.
yeah, yeah. And I know. You've seen some of the things that we do, and the number of leaders that I sit down with and say, I don't do numbers, I don't do data. But the reality is, I mean, you could be a history teacher, an English teacher. There's data in there all the time. It's exactly as you're saying. It's not necessarily numbers. There's stories to be told. It's a bigger, richer picture. Rab, you come back and said, well, great. I'm glad you enjoyed the session, but it's believing that there's better possible. That we all have to live with that hope. We have to hold on to the fact that yes, we've got this information, but there's more possible. And Subhani, we've managed to go through this without real concentration on AI at all. We haven't really. I mean, the reality is that AI, augmented intelligence, is helping
Yes.
the process. It's
Yes.
making it faster, but it's
Yeah.
not the center of this, is it?
No, and also unless you have a enough understanding of what data is, you are going to go down using the technology, AI technology, in ways where, yes, it may be saving time, doing things, but actually not producing the result that you would want it to be. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
why I keep talking about. I love that technology. It
yeah,
is going to save a lot and lot of time. It is going to, but please understand the process towards going that. Please put certain guardrails. Please put certain ways, some do's, don'ts, all of that. And the AI has been there for, we have been doing with AI for a long time, right?
yeah,
It's only the concept, when you talk about AI specifically in this education concept, it's all about generative AI. Nobody talks about the patterns and the machine learning, the correlations that it can bring up, empowering the richness of the information you have,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
This,
yeah,
I
yeah,
was talking about somebody calling the school and complaining, right? AI can really bring that whole voice sentiment to forefront to say,
yeah,
yes, but they were. So when then you pick up the phone with that particular parent, you first ask how they are feeling. You
yeah,
don't immediately delve into the complaint they made,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
that is where the power comes in, into understanding how do you use the technology to better serve, not just save time, better serve. And in order to better serve, you need to understand a lot of this more.
yeah. I mean, that's such a powerful thing, isn't it? How are you today, rather than what you're
Yes.
complaining about,
Yes.
and that conversation starter is just can change the world for that person. Can't it?
Absolutely.
But look, Sabana, we could talk forever, and we could keep going. We can't. But as people are saying in the notes, great session, great conversation. There is much to do on this because there's so many tools out there that are saying they're data rich and informative and so on. But the reality is, we as humans in our organizations need to get more serious about what we know and what we need to know. And that's really
Yeah.
what you're centering on, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd just say, Sabani, thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate it. And it obviously has been appreciated by people that are watching. And look, it will be out there and available. So please keep commenting, keep getting involved in this conversation. Sabani, I'm going to have to say goodbye for now.
Yes.
Just hold on for a moment and I will just finish.
Thank you so much for having me. And I hope they would take some things back about thinking how to position data more.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to Sabani Bose for this conversation. Please, if you want to get hold of Disha, the details are on the profile. Please make the link and get involved in the conversation. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with Tony Staniff talking about maths and maths education across the system and all the work that he's been doing with the organizations that he's working with. So that'd be really, really interesting conversation. And we're going to sort of center on some of those curriculum elements too. So thank you for being here this morning. We really appreciate you listening. Please like, share and subscribe. We know that you're out there and you are supporting us. There'll be much more news coming over the next few months as we grow Friday Focus and the newsletter that goes out with it. There are many, many more people that are getting involved, and thank you for that. We appreciate you, and please get involved in the conversation. We'll see you soon.